everyone, welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of the History of the American Labor Movement video series, and today we're going to pick up right where we left off in part 1. Alright, we're back in colonial times, and due to slave rebellions and indentured servant revolts, we are seeing that in the major cities and the busy seaports, they are moving towards wage-earning workers. Alright, the threat to the infrastructure that the wealthy class has invested in cities such as New York is so high that they feel it's no longer worth it to continue to perpetuate slavery and indentured servitude in these cities, right? So at the same time, because of the same infrastructure that has been built, because of the amount that has been invested in streets and, buildings, things like that, people are now having the luxury of not having to build their homes, not having to worry about streets. So they have time to really hone their craft, right? And we see the emergence of master tradesmen, master craftsmen. We have people who are extremely good at carpentry, who are, master masons. We have master shoemakers. We have master candle makers. Any niche, artisanal craft or trade or anything like that that you can think of, we have somebody achieving mastery at. And these people were able to set up shop, and their wares were in high demand. Everybody wants the best, right? Especially if you have money to buy something, you want to buy it the best. And people soon realized that the demand for the commodities that they were being produced was outpacing what a single person could output. And so suddenly we have master tradesmen, and they are in need of labor, basically. They need to hire someone. So for a lot of years in the colonies, the go-to move was to buy 7 years of indentured servitude. And for between 50 and 100 of 2020 American dollars, you could purchase 7 years of 24/7 labor from someone. And the only thing that you owed them in return was housing, food, and the occasional set of clothing. Now you can imagine people got the bare minimum standards of housing, threadbare clothing, and hardly any food, just enough to get by. And it wasn't a great situation for the indentured servants, but on the flip side, the master tradesmen started to realize that this wasn't a great situation for them either, right? Because when there wasn't work coming in, when there weren't orders, if they got sick and couldn't work, if there wasn't a constant state of, funds coming in, it didn't matter because they had a contract and they still had to feed, clothe, and house these indentured servants. And so, it kind of became something where, and this was written by a journalist back then, it says, "The work done by freemen comes cheaper in the end than that done by slaves and indentured servants." Because, right, we can hire and fire at our whim a freeman. We can have someone work, and when there's no more work, send them on their way. And so from this situation, we have the emergence of the first real wage-earning working class in the colonies. So now we have these wage-earning journeymen, basically, right? So in shops back then, at the very top of the pyramid, you have the master tradesmen. And those are, that's the employer, the owner. They provide the raw materials. They provide the place to work. They provide theoretically training to the people working for them. And then they sell the goods, and they, from the profits, can dole out a wage to what we have next on the tier, which is the journeyman. And these are people who have finished an apprenticeship. So basically they know what they're doing, right? They know how to be a carpenter. They know how to do carpentry. And, they've learned the skill, but they don't have the name to set up their own shop, and they don't have the experience, right? And then underneath them in the shop, we have apprentices. And these are young people, usually like kids, 10 or so years old, even younger sometimes, and they are doing the grunt work in the shop, right? Cleaning, doing errands, anything that the apprentices or the journeyman and the master tradesmen don't want to do. And they're not getting paid a wage in return. What they're receiving in return is they're learning the skill, so they can become a journeyman, so they can eventually hopefully work their way up to becoming a master tradesman. And so within these shops, we have right in the middle the journeyman, and they are earning a wage, and it's unique to the colonies, because all of a sudden we have people who have to work for a living. They don't come from money, they don't have wealth to lean on, but they also don't have a contract. They don't have someone who has to provide them a home, has to provide them food, right? So they really have to get out there and hustle. And this is like a new thing, because if you are a journeyman and you are working in a shop at the whim of the master tradesman, then if they don't have work coming in and you are fired or let go, all of a sudden you are going to starve, you are going to lose whatever housing, if it's winter, you're probably going to freeze, and you might think, well, maybe, they could save for hard times during the good times, but the system was literally set up to prevent that, all right? So to become a journeyman, you had to agree, and this is the exact verbiage, you had to agree to be content to abate their wages according to the fall of the commodities. Okay, so in the colonies, things were kind of in a constant state of flux, right? Cost of living went up and down, what you could charge for your wares went up and down. It was a new country, basically. So you would think that if the cost of living goes up and down, everything comes out even in the wash. Because, your wages are going up and down with the cost of living, right? But unfortunately, you only had the wages going down with the cost of living going down and not coming back up, all right? Our legislators, the provincial lawmakers, literally set a rule, a maximum wage that could be earned by journeymen. And basically, if the wage was set at $3 a week for, the journeyman, and if you somehow, through some stroke of luck, earned $4 that week, you would be fined that extra dollar and a percentage of your earnings. So you would end up making less than the max rate if you accepted more than the max rate of payment. And that really, kept people in place. And the reason given for this law, for this, maximum rate by lawmakers, and this is directly from the law books, from the colonial law books, and it's outrageous, so get ready to be enraged. The reason that there is a maximum placed on the wages is to save the American working man from himself. High wages more frequently make laboring people miserable because they employ their spare time and cash in debauching their morals and ruining their health. So basically, hey folks, we're just looking out for you. We can't pay you too much. We don't know what you would do with it. You might hurt yourselves. Okay? So people started saying, this is a little weird, right? They're getting wise because the journeymen are doing the same work as the master tradesmen, but they have no security. They're hardly earning enough to get by, and they're starting to talk to each other, and they're starting to think big picture, right? So now we have something called benevolent societies being set up, and this is basically the grandfather of what we would call labor unions later. So within these benevolent societies, and it's almost, synonymous with a mutual aid society, right? We have the workers of one, say carpenters, all the journeyman carpenters in one city come together, they pool funds, they have a joint savings basically. And so from that savings, they can provide funds to the unemployed, they can provide basically paid sick leave, and, they're taking care of each other. And with this, they're basically building their own social safety net, right? And along with this comes a sense of camaraderie and a sense of loyalty, so that they're willing to stick together, looking for the big picture. All of us, to get basically not me, us, right? Kind of situation. So we have our first basically collective negotiations come from this. All right, in 1767, we have the Benevolent Society of House Painters of New York. They come together and they take a stand for all of the journeymen in the city. And they say that, they signed a petition saying that master craftsmen importing labor from neighboring colonies was lowering wages and therefore lowering the value of all labor. And so they were not going to work, they were not going to do anything until, there was some measures put in place to prevent this. And previously, complaints from small groups or from single, journeymen were ignored. They were brushed off. Why even bother? But this was the first time that there was a massive collective bargaining brought to a table. And the legislators were like, the lawmakers were like, okay, whatever you want, basically. And this was really inspiring. It kind of sounds silly. The house painters were all sticking up, with the threat of no house painting, but it worked. And it's important because it set off a chain of events where we have now benevolent societies coming together, and they're signing petitions, and they're striking together. All right, and this had mixed results throughout the colonies. Sometimes they got instant results, like the house painters did, instant success. And other times the threat that the strike or whatever brought to the table wasn't great enough, and they failed. And sometimes when the threat was too great to the bottom line and the demands were too high, they were arrested or fined, right? So we're locking you up for daring to step out of your place just a little too far. And out of this, we have a situation where people are working together. You know, they're kind of balancing out wages a little bit so that people are in a better situation. All right, they're able to maybe establish themselves a little bit, put some funds aside, and now we have, basically before this situation, there was a very small percentage of people able to vote in the colonies because there was such severe stipulations on who could vote, right? You had to either be a landowner or have a certain amount of money to your name. And now, all of a sudden, these poor people are able to scrape together just enough money. And, you know, the benevolent societies might even pitch in so that there was one representative from their collective that was able to vote. And now they have representation within the elections. And so from this, we have people from the benevolent societies, people from the lower class, they begin to run for office. They begin to run for city council. They begin to run for lawmaker positions. And whereas in the past, they had no chance of winning because no wealthy person is going to vote in someone from the lower class whose interests don't align with theirs into office. We have now poor people being elected to important roles within the government, within the cities. And a way that this was assisted was, you know, really brought about was through marketing. And the marketing was done by the Benevolent Society of the Press and the journalists in New York City, okay? So the press realized that they are the ones putting out the papers and the printed materials within the city. And so leaflets start to appear throughout the city at every election. And the common phrase on these leaflets was, "A poor honest man is always preferable to a rich knave." And that really got, you know, the working people thinking. Anybody who was eligible to vote who was not wealthy ended up voting for the poor person. I mean, think back then. Propaganda or marketing was so new that it was, like, really effective, you know? The press wouldn't lie to us. And it was so effective, and so many poor people were being elected to city council that the governor was like, whoa. And he is quoted, Governor Cosby is quoted as saying, "This city, if it continues, will be entirely at the beck of men of the lowest class." Oh, terrifying, right? And so we have arrests start happening of journalists, of people involved in the press. They are charged with sedition and libel, and seditious libel combo. And one notable journalist that was arrested, who was kind of a leader as far as the leafleting and the propaganda around elections, was named John Peter Zenger, and he was charged with treasonous acts and sedition and fomenting sedition and basically a whole list of things because they wanted to make an example out of this guy, right? And so it went to the Supreme Court in the colonies, and it was argued that, you know, these people were trying to basically overturn the structure of the colonies. They were putting people in place who weren't worthy, and through the press, right? They were using the press to their own needs, and it was argued that it needed to be shut down, right? We need a cap on this press. We need someone who with oversight over what they can print. And we have a lawyer come who is basically working pro bono. He's working for them. He's volunteering to represent all of the journalists that are getting arrested. And in this case specifically, he argued that this was not a matter of libel or sedition. This was a matter of individual liberty. And he really played to the judges of the Supreme Court. He really played to their idea of, what are we even doing in the colonies if not, you know, campaigning for our individual liberties? You know, we might as well be back in England. And you have to keep in mind the time frame. We're pre-revolution, but people are getting edgy and they're not loving England at this time, so they don't want to be compared to England, right? So the decision comes down that they are not guilty. And this is incredibly important, okay? This is a huge win for the labor movement because this sets a precedent for free press in the colonies and later free press in America, free press in the United States. So now let's look back at kind of the things that we hold dear in this country today in 2020, all right? Individual liberties are like the highest law of the land. Free press, we can't scream about it enough. The abolition of slavery is like one of our proudest things in this country, right? So let's look at these things, and we'll realize through these videos that none of these things were given. None of these things were handed down by the wealthy, all right? In our history books, we see kind of like this magical progression of human evolution, of thought, where, oh, of course, of course we would free slaves. Of course we would do away with indentured servitude. Oh, yes, in America we always have a free press. No, the wealthy class, the ruling class, tried to keep people enslaved. They wanted to keep people at poverty wages. They wanted to keep people from speaking their minds, from running for office. They wanted to shut down the free press, right? They wanted oversight. They wanted only what was in alliance with what they, their best interest printed. None of these things were given, all right? These things were earned check by check throughout history by organized workers and organized labor, all right? Withholding labor to, improve working conditions, rebelling violently when needed to abolish slavery, and, kind of really striking out and setting a precedent for free press in America. That can all be traced back to labor and the labor movement, all right? So really think about it. Like, none of these things that we think are just inherent to America are. They were won through labor, through working people's efforts, right? Now I'm rambling. Okay, I'll leave you there, and I'll see you next time.